They mocked the janitor, scammed clients, and disrespected their own boss. What they didn't know, the janitor was the CEO all along. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Seated at the head of a long polished conference table, Isaiah Whitmore scanned the faces of his executive team. A multi-millionaire real estate mogul, Isaiah had built his company from the ground up. Years of sweat, sleepless nights, and sacrifices no one in this room could even imagine. Yet despite his relentless pursuit of excellence, something was off. His company's name, Whitmore Realty, had become synonymous with success. But recently, the complaints had been piling up. Hostile work environment, racial discrimination, unethical sales tactics. At first he chalked it up to disgruntled employees looking for a payout. But then, an anonymous letter landed on his desk, one that changed everything. It wasn't from a customer or an agent. It was from a janitor. In sharp, brutally honest handwriting, the letter painted a picture of a company rotting from the inside. Employees mocking lower-level workers, managers berating staff, a culture driven by arrogance and greed, all under his name. Isaiah clenched his jaw, tapping a pen against the table as he glanced at his executives, who were laughing and scrolling through their phones, completely unbothered. He took a slow breath. These people worked for him, but did they respect him? "All right," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "I want full reports on the departments, sales, HR, management. I want to know exactly what's going on here." One of the executives, Brandon Ellis, smirked, arrogant, the kind of guy who talked more than he listened. "Boss, I think you're overreacting," Brandon chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Every company gets complaints. You think Warren Buffett loses sleep over a couple of janitors whining?" The room erupted in laughter. Isaiah didn't. Instead, he leaned forward, locking eyes with Brandon. "I built this company from nothing. Do you know what that means?" Brandon opened his mouth but hesitated. The laughter died down. "It means I know what struggle looks like," Isaiah continued, his voice steady, sharp. "I wasn't born into this. I wasn't handed a silver spoon, and if there's even a fraction of truth in these complaints, I need to see it for myself." Brandon scoffed, crossing his arms. "And how do you plan on doing that?" Isaiah didn't answer, because in that moment the decision was already made. But no one in that room was ready for what was coming next. The office was silent, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound as Isaiah sat alone in his corner office. The skyline of Phoenix, Arizona stretched beyond the window, but he wasn't looking at it. His gaze was locked on his reflection in the glass. Was he really about to do this? He ran a hand over his clean-shaven face, then down to the expensive tailored suit he wore like armor every day. Power, authority, control. That's what his clothes represented. But none of that had stopped his own employees from turning his company into a breeding ground for disrespect and deceit. He had to see it with his own eyes, not as Isaiah Whitmore, the CEO, but as someone invisible. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant, Maya. "Want me to call HR and start an internal review?" He stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed 2 words. "Not yet." The next morning, Isaiah drove to a rundown barbershop on 7th Street. He walked in as a CEO and walked out as someone else entirely, a fresh buzz cut, specks of grey now visible where his perfectly groomed style once was. Next, he hit a thrift store, gone were the $10,000 suits and Italian leather shoes. Instead, he slipped into a pair of faded jeans, scuffed-up sneakers, and an oversized janitor's polo. The kind of outfit people look right past. His final stop? The warehouse where all janitorial supplies were managed. It took one phone call to HR to arrange a new hire under a fake name. John Whitman. No one questioned it. No one double-checked. The very next day, John the janitor clocked in for his first shift at Whitmore Realty. The break room smelled like stale coffee and yesterday's regrets. John, stood by the supply closet, pushing an old mop bucket across the tile. At first, no one even acknowledged him. Then came the whispers. A group of junior agents passed by, barely lowering their voices. New janitor looks like he just got out of prison. Man, they'll hire anybody these days. Bet he won't last a week. Isaiah kept his head down, silent, watching. The real estate floor was a jungle filled with sharp-dressed predators circling their next commission check. He saw agents lying to clients about limited-time offers, twisting words to force desperate families into terrible mortgage deals. In the back, the accounting team was cracking jokes at the expense of a temp worker, an older woman struggling to enter data fast enough. And then there was Brandon Ellis, the executive from the meeting, standing by the receptionist's desk. He leaned in, way too close, flashing a sleazy smile. "Come on, Lexi, just one drink. You know you want to say yes." The young woman's body language screamed discomfort, but she forced a laugh. "I really should get back to work, Brandon." He smirked. "That's what I like about you, always working hard. But don't act like you're too good for a little fun." Isaiah gripped the mop handle so tight his knuckles went white. This was just day one, and already he was disgusted. But what he saw next made his stomach turn. By the third day, Isaiah had seen enough to make his blood boil, but something told him the worst was yet to come. He worked quietly, pushing his mop, emptying trash cans, listening. It was almost too easy to blend in. No one cared about the janitor. No one lowered their voices. They spoke freely, completely unaware that their words were building their own downfall. The first major red flag came when he was cleaning near the sales bullpen. "Listen, Mrs. Carter," one of the top agents, Rick Dawson, said into his headset, reclining in his chair like he owned the place. "I get it. You're worried about the payments, but trust me, in 6 months, that mortgage will be the best thing that ever happened to you." Isaiah paused. The client on the phone clearly sounded nervous. Rick hit the mute button, grinned, then turned to his coworker. "These old folks are so easy to manipulate. You hit 'em with some fancy words and a limited-time offer, and boom, they're signing their life away." The two agents high-fived. Isaiah's stomach churned, but it got worse. Later that day, he was scrubbing the bathroom sinks when the door swung open, and two executives strolled in. Brandon Ellis and another senior manager, Tom Reynolds. They were deep in conversation, oblivious to the fact that the janitor standing 5 feet away was listening to every word. "I swear, Isaiah is getting soft," Brandon scoffed. "Man used to be a killer in this industry. Now he's worried about company culture and ethics. Please." Tom chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, and have you noticed how out of touch he is? Half the time, he doesn't even know what's happening on the ground level. That's why we get away with so much." Isaiah stared at his own reflection in the mirror. They thought he was weak, a joke, an absentee leader. He gripped the edge of the sink, fighting the urge to explode right then and there. That evening, just before the office shut down, Isaiah walked into the break room. His goal was simple: finish wiping the tables, then go home and process everything he'd seen. But the second he stepped inside, he froze. A group of men stood in a loose circle, laughing. In the middle of them was an older janitor, Miguel, holding a mop, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. And in front of him, a pile of spilled coffee and shattered glass on the floor. Brandon stood nearby, arms crossed, smirking. "Well, you gonna clean it up or just stand there?" Miguel bent down to start picking up the glass. Another man, one of the agents, shook his head, chuckling. "Hey, careful, Miguel. Don't want you bleeding all over the place. Ain't got time for HR paperwork today." The laughter grew louder. Isaiah couldn't take it anymore. He stepped forward. "That's enough." The room went silent. Brandon turned, raising an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Isaiah swallowed down the fury burning in his chest. "The man's been working here longer than most of you. Show some respect." The group snickered. Brandon took a step closer, towering over Isaiah. "Respect? For a janitor?" Isaiah's jaw clenched. He wanted so badly to rip off the disguise right then and there, to show them exactly who they were talking to. But he wasn't done yet. So instead, he just locked eyes with Brandon and said, "You never know who's watching, man. Be careful who you disrespect." Brandon laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Whatever you say, buddy. Now get back to work." Isaiah forced himself to walk away. But as he left the break room, his heart pounded with one undeniable truth. Tomorrow morning, everything would change. And when the real Isaiah Whitmore walked into that office, heads would roll. The next morning, the atmosphere in the office was exactly the same. Casual, arrogant, full of people who thought they ran the place. But today was different. Isaiah Whitmore wasn't pushing a mop bucket anymore. He wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. He was back in his tailored navy blue suit, polished shoes, and a watch worth more than most of these people's cars. He walked through the front doors of his company, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just a CEO, he was a man on a mission. The receptionist, Lexi, looked up, her face instantly turning red. "Mr. Whitmore, I didn't know you were coming in this early." Isaiah nodded once, but his eyes scanned the office floor. He spotted Brandon laughing with some other executives. The sales agents were already pitching their shady deals to morning clients. The accounting department was making their usual snide remarks about the lower-level staff. Same office, same people. They had no idea that their entire world was about to be turned upside down. "Attention, everyone," Isaiah's assistant Maya announced over the intercom. "All employees are required in the conference room immediately. Attendance is not optional." The murmurs started almost immediately. "What's going on? Is this about the complaints?" "Nah, probably some new policy crap." Brandon yawned as he strolled into the boardroom. "This better not be a waste of time," he muttered to Tom. The moment Isaiah walked in, silence fell over the room. Gone was the quiet, ignored janitor. Now they were staring at the man who signed their paychecks. Isaiah took his time, setting down a stack of folders. His eyes scanned every single person. And then, finally, he spoke. "In this company, we have rules, standards, a code of ethics." He leaned forward, voice calm, deliberate. "Over the past week, I have personally observed rampant disrespect, unethical behavior, and a complete lack of integrity in this office." The executives shifted uncomfortably. Some of the agents looked at one another, confused. Isaiah opened the first folder. "Let's start with you, Rick Dawson." Rick blinked, caught off guard. Yes, sir." Isaiah read word for word the conversation he'd overheard about manipulating elderly clients. Rick's face drained of color. I never said that." Isaiah slapped the folder shut. "You're fired. Effective immediately." A ripple of shock spread through the room. But Isaiah wasn't done. He turned to another agent. "You've laughed along to these predatory sales tactics. You, fired." He moved to the accounting team. "Mocking your own co-workers, fired." And then, finally, he turned to Brandon Ellis. Brandon smirked, trying to play it cool. "Come on, Isaiah. You're really gonna listen to a bunch of whining?" Isaiah didn't blink. "I listened to you, Brandon, the things you've said, the way you've treated people you think are beneath you." He let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "You don't work here anymore. Get out." The smirk vanished. "You can't be serious." Isaiah cut him off with a simple, icy stare. "Maya, call security if Mr. Ellis doesn't leave on his own." The room held its breath. For the first time in his life, Brandon looked small, weak, humiliated. He pushed his chair back and stormed out. And just like that, The empire of arrogance began to crumble. Not everyone was fired that day. Isaiah turned his focus to those who weren't active participants, but stood by in silence, the ones who had the potential to be better. "You have a choice," he told them. "This company is changing. If you want to stay, you will respect every single person who walks through these doors. You will treat clients fairly. You will uphold the values this company was built on." He paused, looking around. "And if that's a problem for you, there's the door." The room was dead silent. Then, one by one, heads nodded. Some employees left, others stayed. But for the first time in a long time, the office felt different. This wasn't just about cleaning house. It was about rebuilding something worth being proud of. But the real challenge was only beginning. By lunchtime, the office felt like a completely different place. The toxic energy that had poisoned it for so long was gone. Some desks were empty, their previous occupants escorted out by security. Others were still occupied, but their owners sat quietly, processing what had just happened. Isaiah walked the floor, his presence no longer ignored. For the first time, employees looked at him with a mix of fear, respect, and something else: hope. He stopped by the receptionist's desk. Lexi looked up, hesitating. "Mr. Whitmore, You don't owe me an explanation," Isaiah interrupted. "But if you ever feel uncomfortable in this workplace again, my door is open. No one should feel forced to smile through harassment." Her eyes softened, relief washing over her face. "Thank you." Isaiah just nodded before moving on. Not everyone in this office had been corrupt. Some had just been scared to speak up. That was going to change. Not everyone deserved a second chance. Some behavior was inexcusable, but Isaiah also knew the difference between a bad person and a weak one. So instead of firing the junior agents who had followed along with Rick's sales tactics, he gave them an ultimatum. "You're on probation, and starting today, every sale you make will be audited. One false promise, one shady deal, you're out." One of them, Elliot, swallowed hard. "Mr. Whitmore, I never meant to—" Isaiah cut him off. "I don't want excuses. I want change. Prove to me that you can do better." Elliot nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I will." Isaiah held his gaze for a moment before moving on. Some people, when given a second chance, rise to the occasion, and some never change. Before the day ended, Isaiah found himself outside the janitorial supply closet. Miguel was inside, folding towels. For a long moment, Isaiah just stood there. This man had been humiliated right in front of him, and Isaiah had waited. Sure, he had intervened a little, but he hadn't stopped it. He stepped inside. "Miguel." Miguel turned, blinking in surprise. "Mr. Whitmore." Isaiah hesitated. "I owe you an apology." Miguel tilted his head, confused. "I saw how they treated you," Isaiah admitted, "and I didn't stop it right away." Miguel smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You were learning. I could see it in your eyes. Sometimes the best way to fix a problem is to feel it for yourself first." Isaiah exhaled, the weight in his chest easing just a little. "No one in this building will ever treat you like that again. Not on my watch." Miguel nodded once, wiping his hands. "Good. Because this place? It has potential. You just needed to see it from the ground up." Isaiah smiled for the first time that day. "Yeah," he said. "I did. But fixing the past was only half the battle. Now it was time to build something better." 1 month after everything changed, Whitmore Realty was unrecognizable. Gone were the whispered insults, the shady sales tactics, the fear of speaking up. In their place, a culture of accountability. Isaiah had implemented strict ethical guidelines, a zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment, and an open-door system where employees could report concerns without fear of retaliation. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But for the first time in a long time, people believed in this company again. And Isaiah. He didn't just lead from his office anymore. Every week he walked the floors. He talked to people. He listened. Because he had learned the most important lesson of his career. A leader is only as strong as the people who stand beside him. Isaiah sat in his office, looking over one last letter. Not a complaint this time. A thank you. From Miguel, from Lexi, from Elliot, from people who had been afraid to speak up until now. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Then he looked up, straight at the camera. Power doesn't come from a title, he said. It comes from how you treat people. You want to know who someone really is? Watch how they act when they think no one is watching. He let the words sink in. So now I'm asking you, who are you when no one's looking? He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. Because one day, someone will be watching. And when that day comes, make sure you're proud of what they see. Fade to black. If this story made you think, hit that like button. If you believe in leadership with integrity, share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, respect is earned by how you treat others. Stay real.